Lawful disclaimer and notice of intent. This podcast and all related content are created, owned, operated, and sponsored exclusively by me, the sole author, speaker, and producer. Any other product, service, and/or entity, living or non-living, which may be discussed, displayed, and/or somehow given attention on this podcast is not and has never been an endorsement, advertisement, support, and/or any other kind of validation for its existence in any capacity, nor at all intended to at all facilitate its continued existence in any capacity. I mention things on what I consider to be an as-needed basis to fulfill what I consider adequate as evidence in my best attempt to prove the reality of who I am and what this podcast is attempting to achieve to clearly demonstrate what I consider to thoroughly substantiate my assertions. I act simultaneously in private and public capacities, and this podcast reflects my direct and autonomous expression. It is created and published from within Canada, but is intended for a global audience, including legal jurisdictions in the United States and all common law nations. All statements, views, and narratives presented are based solely on my personal experiences, perceptions, and understanding of the reality I am facing, including ongoing egregious defamation, targeted harassment, and credible threats to my safety and life. I do not and never have claimed that my views aren't extremely, if not completely, accurate interpretations of objective reality, particularly given the information I had access to at the time that I may have expressed them. I explicitly and permanently do not consent, have never consented, and will never consent to any entity, living, non-living, artificial, institutional, governmental, spiritual, and/or otherwise, claiming and/or exercising any agency, ownership, and/or representation over me, my will, my name, my voice, my life story, my spirit, and/or my creative works, in whole or in part, under any conditions or interpretations in any time or place. Any such attempt is non-consensual, void ab initio, and constitutes an ongoing violation of my dignity, rights, and autonomy. Any possible exceptions will be extremely clearly, explicitly, publicly named by me and have the exact scope of my consent well defined on this podcast. For example, in the case of me hiring an attorney to represent me as part of a formal legal process, taking action on a notice of intent provided by this podcast. I affirm my right to spiritual integrity, mental sovereignty, and bodily autonomy, as protected under Section 2A of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, and Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18. Any targeting of my being, including but not limited to through esoteric, psychic, spiritual, occult, energetic, and/or AI-enabled means, is deemed non-consensual harm, spiritually violent coercion, and an attack on my right to exist as a sovereign being. I affirm that this podcast, in part, serves as a lawful, peaceful assertion of spiritual self-defense. This podcast is non-fiction and reflects a serious public and ongoing documentation of systemic and targeted defamation, personal and professional sabotage, attempted narrative hijacking, psychological abuse, reputational terrorism, and threats to my physical and spiritual safety, including credible indications of attempted murder and contracted harm by and or on behalf of powerful individuals and or groups. I affirm that this documentation is expressly created for evidentiary use in formal legal proceedings, including those under the jurisdiction of U.S. federal court and Canadian superior courts, and any international human rights and or public accountability processes. I affirm this is not and never has been intended as role-playing, flirting, and or entertainment of any kind. I accept no liability, moral and or legal, for any third-party misunderstanding, reinterpretation, misuse, and or misrepresentation of this content, whether fully conscious and intentional or otherwise, particularly including but not limited to by AI systems trained on this content without my explicit public consent, commentators, influencers, or institutions attempting to weaponize this podcast, and individuals acting under false pretenses and or covert affiliations. Only the clear, explicit language of this release and any subsequent public communication directly issued by me must be considered authoritative, accurate representations of my thoughts, feelings, intent, and the reality of my overall state of existence. In any case of clear direct conflict between statements I've explicitly made across different releases on this podcast, the most recent of such, that being the one contained in the latest publicly visible release available containing such on this podcast, should be considered applicable. In such cases, only what is explicitly stated is at all applicable, and absolutely no implications should be assumed about any changes regarding any somehow relevant details and or anything else under any circumstances. All creative, expressive, and narrative content within this podcast is my sole and original intellectual property. I retain all moral rights as author and subject, all economic rights unless explicitly transferred via my public agreement to do so, and the right to veto any derivative, distorted, and or manipulated version of my work and or story. I do not have and have never had any obligation or debt of any kind to any entity to create or release anything on this podcast or anywhere else at any point in time. No other party, living or non-living, holds and or may claim credit, authorship, and or interpretation rights over my expression. I affirm that no valid, public, verifiable evidence exists to dispute these facts. This podcast is not and has never been intended as an endorsement of terrorism or violence in general. However, it should be especially carefully understood that various forms of not necessarily corresponding violence tend to be an inevitable consequence of extremely intense, meticulous, extensive, prolonged terrorism, and it's very much intentional for this podcast to demonstrate extremely clearly that my usual aversion to violence due to my typically gentle nature is not something that has boundless understanding, patience, empathy, or will persist more or less absolutely unconditionally for any reason. I've always wanted and done my very best to ensure it's extremely clear that at all creating, enabling, and or facilitating the perpetuation of narratives at all in contradiction with my official position that is objectively extremely clearly established on this podcast is not, never has been, and never will be what I've been trying to achieve with this podcast or in general in any of my efforts at any point in time. I do not and never have intentionally incited terrorism, including but not limited to violence, blackmail, and or coercion. I affirm my fundamental intent as peaceful, lawful, and self-defensive. However, targeted campaigns to stalk, defame, threaten, impoverish, silence, spiritually attack, and or physically harm me will be treated as conspiracies to commit grievous harm and or murder. This podcast is an affirmative public notice of my unambiguous non-consent and a lawful response to sustained systemic abuse. While my fundamental intent in communicating in general through any means is not and has never been malicious in nature, I affirm it can, will, and should exert malicious influence upon anything operating with malice towards me and or this podcast, especially more so the more demonstrably I'm proving that malice exists. And it should be understood that any situation where I continue not to extremely clearly receive any compensation or reward I'm willing to accept is effectively, absolutely, unconditionally an increase in the severity of that malice. I've created the entirety of this podcast under extremely harsh circumstances that I've always believed and asserted are entirely unjust for me to be left in, given the reality of who I am. Circumstances of my existence, including but not limited to my current housing status, financial vulnerability, and material limitations, do not and cannot invalidate my legal personhood, expressive rights, and or entitlement to protection under law. I reject any attempt to diminish my credibility and or rights on the basis of poverty, social class, and or housing insecurity in accordance with Section 7 of the Canadian Charter, the Due Process Clause of the U.S. Constitution, and international law prohibiting discrimination on the basis of economic status. Despite the extent I've irrefutably exposed the truth surrounding a conflict that should have been so extremely obviously recognized as extremely serious to the point that my efforts on this podcast should have made a substantial difference in my life long ago, my life circumstances continue to not have meaningfully or clearly improved at all whatsoever. I still have not ever received any compensation or reward of any kind whatsoever for any of my efforts at all involving the conflict being addressed by this podcast, neither directly nor indirectly from any source. I am, always have been, and always will be absolutely unconditionally unwilling to ever at all accept any compensation or reward whatsoever, directly or indirectly, that at all compromises my integrity, whether directly or indirectly. I do not, never have, and never will consent to it being at all considered to be me and or any entity operating at all with my consent and or best interests regarding any communication somehow claiming and or implying that I somehow do ever have and or ever will unofficially support any kind of position at all contradictory with what I've said on this podcast. This disclaimer and notice of intent supersedes any and all contrary interpretations, explicitly including any and all unauthorized claims therein made against me. I reserve all legal, expressive, spiritual, moral, and intellectual rights without limitation. Any attempt to silence, reinterpret, discredit, and or co-opt this documentation must be treated as malicious bad faith conduct and may be cited in formal legal proceedings as evidence of further targeting. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I've yet to receive any response from Legal Mindset. As for Vincent Richea, I noticed I got an SMTP result message from Gmail that his old email address I'd used to contact him in the past is no longer active, so I've removed it from my mailing list. I actually did a bit of research to see if he'd moved to a different law firm or what had happened to him as well, though. I was very much interested in trying to contact him to get his input on my last release here and this podcast in general, as well as see if he might be interested in helping me press criminal charges against those I've formally accused of committing criminal entrapment and other crimes against me in Canada. Turns out Vincent Richea ended up moving to a different firm called Durstein Penman, or it seems they renamed themselves at some point to Durstein Bartineau. But I found and tried contacting his email address at that firm shortly after finding that out, and it turns out that as of October 25th, 2024, he's no longer working there either. I can't seem to find any information on if or where he would have moved to a different law firm, and there doesn't seem to be any information on the internet about him doing anything else. I have no idea if he's even still alive. For the record, I don't know of me having any involvement in anything that happened to him after my last communication with him years ago. Several more spiritual insights I've gotten more recently reveal various things I consider pertinent to address at this time. I haven't been trying to help anyone from my past escape the Matrix at all. I don't believe any of them were ever actually trying to help me do so at all, and in fact, I only feel there's plenty of evidence and reason for me to believe they only ever were even going out of their way to achieve the complete opposite, with complete disregard for the harm it would cause me and complete disregard for my obvious non-consent to them even trying that ever. I haven't been trying to at all leave anyone under the impression otherwise either. Some massive scumbag, subhuman filth, constantly trying to call on entities for love spells and wedding bells, conspiring against me, seems to be, to this day, egregiously misrepresenting things as otherwise, fully consciously and intentionally entirely against my consent. If I had to guess what that means exactly, I interpret it as Chloe Chan Kin is continually, knowingly, entirely non-consensually trying to sabotage me with egregious defamation related to some kind of romantic and or sexual involvement between me and her and possibly also others, and she's exploiting that to enable and facilitate my biological relatives egregiously, criminally, knowingly, entirely non-consensually subjecting me to negative karma of the identity theft, marriage fraud, and life insurance fraud that John Saudet, Vivian Saudet, Mary Aslan, and Dixon Aslan are involved in. For the record, I don't see any particular reason to believe Hassan has stolen any money from me. I mean, I see a little evidence, at least, that he might be involved in stealing some money from me somehow behind the scenes, but I really don't know if or how much or how exactly, except that if he has, it probably has something to do with his support for Iran-backed terrorist groups that I suspect John Saudet is involved in trying to frame me for ever at all knowingly and consensually being involved in helping somehow. Whether or not Hassan has actually stolen any money from me somehow, I've never particularly been attempting to get it back from him. I suspect it's much more likely that my biological relatives are attempting to frame me as unhinged, delusional, and exceedingly antagonistic towards Hassan by trying to make it seem like I have some huge problem with him beyond a principled stance of not blatantly supporting terrorism and in general not behaving with exceedingly reckless disregard for myself and or others. I'm hearing Mary and or Dixon could be having difficulty deciding if they love me or hate me because of Kristen. Seems likely that Chloe is relevant to that as well, and is claiming she supposedly only just now has awakened to who I really am, or something like that. I honestly couldn't care less about that stupidity, yet it's being forcefully goddamn inserted into my energy, and subhuman filth are trying to make it relevant to my life somehow, as if I am and or should be practically obsessed with it. Extremely aggravating. I don't care what anyone ever framing themselves as some kind of mother and or father figure to me thinks about anyone or anything in that context of framing themselves as some kind of parental figure to me. I've never seen anyone besides Mary Aslan and Dixon Aslan as any kind of mother and or father figure at all, and I've always considered both Mary and Dixon quite horrible parental figures of any kind. Further, I am not, have never been, and will never be looking for anyone I could attempt to view and or treat as any kind of parental figure either. Anyone ever even so much as at all attempting to force me to see them as any kind of parental figure for any reason has always in reality been doing so entirely against my consent and to my detriment. I'm hearing something about Kristen and someone being called my ex of some kind collaborating or being called a main couple attacking me. It seems there's an energy trying to force it on me and or others to somehow care for appeasing some kind of supposed parental figure in my life through making Kristen and or that supposed ex, and perhaps specifically some kind of romantic and or sexual connection between them, seem like something I've ever particularly cared about and should somehow have to appease or something like that. Complete lies and extremely malicious towards me. I find it worth mentioning that I have never had a friend with benefits type of connection with anyone in my entire life. I've also never in my entire life at all actually consented to being in a situationship with anyone either. There are absolutely no exceptions. Anyone ever at all even attempting to communicate otherwise has done so fully consciously and intentionally, entirely against my consent and entirely to my detriment. I heard some garbage about a high level occultist stepping over into the light or something. The name Caroline was specifically brought up. Something about they were hurting me and are now protecting me. I don't resonate with that at all. I believe, in fact, that the person is even more aggressively hurting me now, and even more blatantly, unapologetically, maliciously, non consensually framing it as the complete opposite of what they actually, in reality, know it is. The Caroline I knew had a brother named Sabine, and her father was one of Mary's brothers named Martin, if I recall correctly. I haven't seen that family since I was a child, nor do I have any desire to see any of them ever again. I heard some absolute insanity that was quite disturbing to me about some kind of master healer child already contracted to heal the world. Something about Caroline protecting me from people trying to abort it. I've never consented to having a child. Never seen any child anyone would claim I've ever wanted as spiritual or a healer, and I'd actually consider anyone trying to at all stop abortion of some child I've ever supposedly wanted and or consented to being part of any kind of birthing as extremely malicious towards me. All anyone trying to burden me with some kind of contractual obligation to have any kind of responsibility for some kind of child effectively does to my life is trying to deteriorate my existence in every possible manner with responsibility I shouldn't have to burden for some child I never wanted any kind of responsibility for and never actually communicated otherwise to anyone about. There was something about someone who does ritualistic incest and or ritualistic cannibalism who has many hours of secret camera footage of me. Not sure what that's about. They lied about me out of pure jealousy in order to stop a reconciliation. So was John Sade secretly recording me while I was staying at his place and then egregiously defaming me to others to try to sabotage Kimmy reconnecting with me? If it was anyone else he was trying to sabotage me reconnecting with at all, I honestly couldn't care less. But I've already cut him and the rest of all my biological relatives completely out of my life anyways, so Kimmy really should be able to see it a lot more clearly if it ever actually mattered. The 30th of any month is not particularly significant to me personally, and I don't know if or why it'd be particularly significant to anyone else I've ever had in my life. Maybe it's about paying bills or receiving social assistance benefits. Was John trying to set me up to take some kind of negative karma for him in order to collect some kind of government-related financial benefits? I believe Dixon gets some kind of pension towards the end of the month as well, so maybe that has something to do with toxicity that those subhuman filth I once called family are trying to force me to have to suffer dealing with having in my energy, knowingly entirely against my consent to my detriment. There was also something about a karmic earth sign offering sexual favors to some kind of official male to make criminal charges on me stick. Well, if it's not Jamie and or Emaine literally trying to bribe government officials with sexual favors to frame me for murder in order to justify continued attempts to send hitmen after me and make my life an absolute nightmare in general, then my guess would be Chloe Chankin has been bribing Jerry Cow and or Herman Hum and or Matthew Wu with sexual favors in order to try to get away with framing me for murder of the innocent guy I've been talking about me getting framed for the murder of, because the spell work Chloe was trying to get me murdered with backfired due to my spiritual ranking. My guess is that those I once called friends in high school are being treated like some kind of official who supposedly has real insight into my personality due to being in closer physical proximity to me and being supposedly held in high regard by me for an extended period over a decade ago, back when I was in high school. Goddamn psychotic subhuman filth. Chloe really has tried hard to convince people I'm subhuman filth any way she could, huh? Well, none of them ever really knew me. They just knew the me that seemed to be happy being on extremely distant, shallow terms with everyone around me and was okay with hanging around a bunch of losers obsessed with League of Legends who were socially awkward, couldn't get a girlfriend even if they wanted, and all apparently were talking down on me behind my back while pretending to be my friends to my face, and even then not even being all that kind to me, even to my face. Again, there was good reason I chose to cut them all out of my life completely within less than a year after high school ended, and to this day I have absolutely no regrets about it. I'm hearing someone's talking about making a plan to stash a gun and some drugs in my car. I don't have a car and have never had a car, and I really don't know what kind of metaphor someone might be using to indicate something with claiming I have a car either. I myself have never even considered making any kind of plans to stash any guns and or drugs in anyone's car, whether my own or someone else's. I've also never used car as any kind of code word to indicate anything that could be used to stash guns and or drugs inside of. Apparently, someone trying to frame me for possession of guns and drugs is trying to do so because I'm not dead. For the record, my legal knowledge about motor vehicles and the legal definition of traveling has nothing to do with me owning a motor vehicle myself. It's simply knowledge I happened to come across while doing research on the law and was an example I found to be straightforward and perhaps highly relevant and interesting to people compared to a lot of other things I could have used as examples. It was not intended to make any implications about me secretly owning and or having access to a motor vehicle in any kind of ownership capacity. I do not. I'm not opposed to relocating at any point immediately, but it would have to be something I feel actual confidence in and see adequate reason to believe would be at least as safe as, if not safer than, my current situation, which pretty much means it needs to be guaranteed that I'd be taken out of homelessness and into somewhere I can move freely in and out of, but also have a key and or other reliable method to lock access to it and would offer me protection and privacy compared to a situation of homelessness where basically I feel like anyone could just walk up to me in public at any time, whether I like it or not, simply because I'm there. I heard more stuff about criminals trying to initiate me into prostitution, cut off all my resources, and blacklist me from being able to be hired anywhere, so I have no stream of income, and my only option is to prostitute myself in order to take care of myself. Well, it clearly failed because I still take care of myself enough to make releases on this podcast how I do without ever even once selling my body. Also, I myself have never tried to initiate anyone into prostitution and have never had and do not have any plans to ever start doing so. It might be worth mentioning as well that these exact same scum trying to force me into prostitution are even specifically trying to force me to reconnect with Kristen for reasons extremely obviously not at all beneficial to me. I'm also seeing extremely weird attempts to bring my attention to NMP LOL. It seems one or more people have been trying to force me to start some kind of connection with him, not even really caring about how or why. That's definitely not happening. Taylor Swift apparently is relevant to it, which intuitively indicates to me that it probably has something to do with Leslie trying to force me to validate her manipulation schemes, trying to control and exploit me entirely against my consent through my desires towards Kimmy and whatever vulnerabilities Kimmy has to Leslie that Leslie's been trying to exploit to gain power at all costs, basically. Edison's obviously involved in that whole mess, although exactly how or to what extent consensually remains quite unclear to me. It seems his energy getting messed up into all this and with mine entirely against my consent as a result of Leslie's insanity related to Grand Theft Auto role-playing is at least part of the reason Jessica's been violating my energy on many occasions I've mentioned already before, because Edison has some kind of secretly rather significant, at the very least somehow spiritual connection with Jessica, where I'm only becoming increasingly convinced he was somehow trying to depend on it, in hopes that I'd be willing to compromise my integrity and abandon my feelings for Kimmy in favor of some kind of pursuit of Jessica that he had already set up his energy to heavily manipulate my existence through. I suspect my utter unwillingness to even really consider ever doing so, and in the process exposing both Edison and Jessica for trying to set me up and sabotage me, has already caused non-trivial friction in that secretly rather significant connection between them. It seems there's someone trying to make it seem like I'm extremely obsessed with not extremely clearly remembering every aspect of my childhood. It's also possible that Kimmy and Jamie are trying to force me to have to deal with garbage related to NMPLOL and all kinds of chaos and drama because they're trying to get more information about my childhood, and or someone's trying to frame Kimmy for doing that because they do, in order to have that kind of effect on my life and cause further difficulty in my connection with Kimmy and attempt to ruin my life by trying to deter at my will to live and compromise my integrity by trying to leave me feeling like I'd be better off if I decided to abandon my feelings for Kimmy. If it's not Kimmy herself trying to harm me like that, then I extremely heavily suspect Jamie for attempting to do that, and so aggressively that she's doing egregious divination abuse, faking her zodiac sign as Libra in order to attempt to endlessly perpetuate the criminally extremely negative effect on my life therein. I've never been drawn to mermaids. I've never been aware of any kind of code word meaning for mermaids either, nor have ever been trying to establish such with anyone. It seems there's at least one person trying to make it seem like my deep awareness of being watched and heavily under scrutiny all my life, one way or another, who might also be trying to frame me as overly paranoid and disingenuous with some kind of supposedly fake, overly politically correct positioning, might have some weird obsession with mermaids and or using mermaids as some kind of code word to falsify some kind of leverage over me and or falsify evidence of me having some kind of consensual secret connection with them that in reality I've never even been aware of happening at all, and most certainly do not and have never consented to at all. I'm hearing it's possible I have multiple pedophiles among my biological relatives. I'm hearing more than 3 who have been exposed for it because of Trump energy and who might need Chloe's validation because of Imaine's energy. But I was also extremely strangely being warned not to trust anyone from my past, as if I don't already know that, which to me suggests it's quite likely Imaine's energy is somehow substantially involved in falsifying narratives that my biological relatives and or others from my past haven't been as horrid to me as I've been saying, and or that I supposedly for some reason trust them a lot more than I should despite my better judgment. I heard something extremely strange about someone who does not understand why another person loves me so much. They will have their assets and accounts all frozen, could be screaming my name as they throw a tantrum. It was really weird stuff to me. So someone substantially influential might be learning that Kimmy secretly actually loves me a lot more than she's ever really shown anyone, and they don't understand why. Apparently, they created a fake social media page pretending to be me and sent out nasty messages to a lot of different people. Someone named Marcus with a false sense of entitlement. It would really be crazy if Hobson was the one running the criminal impersonation Twitter account at Shattered Pasta and trying to make me seem extremely unhinged and mentally ill to everyone because he's unbelievably petty and bitter that I trolled him about a decade ago by remixing his Nocturnal Rainbow song and titling it as if he was featured on it and I was the original creator. I am not connected to any record label. I never have been and don't at all particularly ever want to be. I don't owe anything to anyone who might have connections to any record labels. For the record, I actually still really like Hobson's song Nocturnal Rainbows and listen to it regularly. I've never felt jealous at all that he was the one who wrote it either, so I was never actually hating on him, nor inclined to. He's released some songs since I made him aware of my existence that suggest he's been trying to intimidate me and wishing death upon me, but I've chosen to leave him alone and focus on my connection with Kimmy and ridding myself of scumbags from my past being in my energy. Like I said, I was never really serious about making music myself. And I mean, he made a cool rap about the Illuminati and all, but he's not as powerful as me, anyways. And I always knew that. There was also something vague about someone trying so hard to send me confusion spells that it's backfiring as dementia. They apparently feel like I owe them an apology for exposing what they did to me. A wolf named Johnson blamed me for doing something I didn't do. Dixon has a brother named Johnson, if I recall correctly. I don't really know anything about him. I have not experienced a horrible car wreck and don't have any brain damage from any kind of physical injury at any point in my life as far as I'm aware. I also definitely don't have dementia, so for me to even have possibly suffered physical injury causing brain damage, it would have had to have been as a very young child. I've never been told such a thing has happened, although I suppose it technically might have. I don't particularly care though, and I haven't seen any actually adequate reason to particularly suspect it or start caring to try to figure out either. I do not want to have a coffee, breakfast, or any other kind of meeting with Chloe and or anyone else from my past. I couldn't care less if Chloe and or anyone else from my past wants to have such with me either. I'm seriously, absolutely, unconditionally unwilling. If any of them are even trying to meet up with me now, they're extremely egregiously, fully consciously, and intentionally trying to exploit my homelessness to force their presence onto me entirely against my consent to my detriment. I'm hearing some quite infuriating things that Chloe's been claiming I was ever showing her affection because she was supposedly mystical and magical. Are you kidding me? She had what I considered the most physically attractive body by far of anyone I'd ever seen in high school and up until I met Kimmy. That was always the only reason I ever showed Chloe any desire. The only reason. I've never seen her as magical at all. If there was ever anything at all magical about her to me, it would have only ever really been her ability to sexually satisfy me by rubbing her latex-clad butt up against me. But even that's no longer something I'd ever give her the absolute blessing of the opportunity of doing, even if she was practically begging to, like her life depended on it, after how she's behaved all this time. Seems she's taken any time I tried giving her an opportunity to reconsider her attitude and behavior towards me in the past and might have ever sent her a message of some kind to do so, especially if it was really affectionate, like the one time I sent something like that to really prove a point when I knew she'd probably abuse it to defame me further. It was something she egregiously exploited with utmost malice towards me as some kind of ammo to most diabolically attempt to frame me as obsessive and stalkerish and make herself sound like of course I'd want her because everyone wants her. Absolutely disgusting. As far as I know, everyone most certainly did not want her, even at what was perhaps her peak in high school. In fact, not one person ever chased her, as far as I could tell, and in fact, she was just made fun of for being obnoxious. Clearly, it was deserved with how she behaves. Goddamn narcissist scumbag piece of trash. But I guess I should have expected her to be such an arrogant piece of trash if she was such subhuman filth. She'd try to destroy my life and criminally entrap me to end up rapidly spiraling downward into self-destruction so she could attempt to justify trying to play God with the world as she teamed up against me with Kimmy and Jamie to try to get me murdered to cover up all their egregious mistreatment and crimes committed against me. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised to learn Kimmy and Jamie have egregiously, arrogantly exploited the affection I gave Kimmy in order to make themselves seem like everyone should want them or something like that too. Quite infuriating. For the record, I've never shown anyone any affection that I have out of some kind of trying to empower them to make themselves seem like everyone should want them like I do. Never. I'm hearing that perhaps, especially with Chloe, she made up an extremely egregious lie about me, and whatever she said, she knew either it would get back to me, or even if it didn't, she'd have to face it. It's something extremely bad that she doesn't want to ever be held accountable for, and at one point she didn't think she'd ever have to be held accountable for it. Now she's lying that I'm the one that was lying about that very thing, and I'm talking horribly of her and trying to frame her for it, basically, and that I'm supposedly holding myself accountable for it because of regret and remorse bubbling up inside of me. God damn it. If she thinks she's telling a joke, this seriously is not goddamn funny. I feel absolutely no regret or remorse for how I've treated anyone. I don't believe I should have to, because I haven't actually done anything unjustified to anyone. I have never truly been in player energy, juggling options, exerting jealousy on others, nor trying to get anyone to feed any addictions I'm being defamed claiming I've ever had. There's absolutely zero real evidence otherwise. I had real options, Chloe didn't, but she tried extremely hard to put me in some kind of position where I wouldn't have options, defamed me so egregiously so I wouldn't level up in any kind of way, tried to make me seem like I was juggling between her and Kimmy, while she knew all along that I was never trying to juggle anyone, and I was always trying to just commit to being with Kimmy from the moment I met her. I've never been trying to get anyone pregnant, neither with my own genetic material nor with anyone else's. I've never been trying to set anyone up to become pregnant somehow either, neither with myself nor with anyone else, for any reason. There's absolutely no real evidence to at all prove otherwise. Anyone that's ever gotten pregnant under the guise of doing it for my benefit, under my instruction or pressure or similar, or as repaying a debt to me, or even claiming they ever had any even remotely adequate reason to believe I'd ever particularly want it and or need it and or benefit from it at all, is operating from a place of massive defamation of me that I never consented to and do not at all actually benefit from. There are absolutely no exceptions. Further, I most certainly believe that one or more extremely scummy criminal subhuman filth have very possibly been trying to land me with a pregnancy in some kind of trap, especially Chloe Chankin. Since Kimmy and Jamie clearly have so extremely heavily been conspiring against me with Chloe, I find it very possible that they might have also attempted such a thing separately as well, or at the very least, they most likely knew Chloe was doing it, and they enabled and facilitated her attempts to do it for their own selfish gain, knowingly entirely against my consent and to my detriment. That's only further reason why they're going to have to completely cut her off from their energy and shun her as worthy of the death she was trying to entirely unjustly, egregiously, criminally bring upon me all this time to cover up her unbelievably diabolical plotting towards me, if they don't want to bring upon themselves the full force of my wrath as well. The wrath that they still currently have the ability to save themselves from, unlike Chloe, if they actually behave decently towards me. Chloe literally has no manner of behavior left to ever even possibly actually behave at all decently towards me. Literally no matter what she ever says or does to anyone ever again. I'm seriously not joking. I'm seriously not trying to play hard to get. I'm seriously not trying to achieve some kind of ulterior motive with my attitude towards her. I'm seriously being completely authentic and straightforward. There's no circumstance where I ever at all consensually reunite with Chloe in any capacity. I will never consent to allowing her back in my life or my energy at all. Do not believe her lies that she's attempting to force herself onto me for both our sake. No, it's entirely for her own sake, fully knowingly, entirely to my detriment and against my consent, for her to even be trying. I literally couldn't care less what she wants anymore, ever again or why. I will never accept any kind of apology from her. I'll never buy it that my feelings supposedly felt fake to her and she's only now feeling they're real. Yeah, right. She's only just now supposedly realizing they're real, long after she thought I'd already be dead and she promised my biological relatives she would have managed to get me murdered with witchcraft? Delusional fraud. I don't believe she's becoming a better person. I don't believe she's even truly capable of it. And even if she is, she'll never be good enough to deserve to be with me, not even close, nor to even have any kind of second chance at being at all a part of my life for any reason. I'm entirely uninterested in hearing about if or how she might be closing cycles of toxicity and narcissistic abuse she's intentionally open to enable and facilitate her exploitation of me and conspiracy to murder me. The energy she wrongly sent after me must be returned entirely back to her, or I will never be at all okay with how things turned out. So if she meant for me to be murdered, she must be murdered, or commit suicide, whichever comes first. No excuses, no mind games. I just want compliance and results. She was never protecting me, at all. I have absolutely no fear to openly express deep disgust towards her in public on this podcast so boldly because I'm that certain with the absolute nightmare I've been through and the kinds of things I'm hearing to this day, only increasingly damning her spiritually, literally every day. You will never see me backtrack on my attitude towards her. I'm seriously done giving her any kind of chances. And this isn't a kind of situation like all the times I've said that about Kimmy in the past. I know Chloe's guilty. I just know. And I know there's no redemption for her in my eyes. Absolutely none. She's now trying to mess with what's seen as my mission and what kind of union I want and or deserve, trying to force onto me that coming into some kind of union with her is my mission, basically trying to force it on me that my purpose in life was to be unbelievably egregiously abused, exploited, disrespected, and neglected by her, and then now have to deal with her extremely negative karma being dumped onto me as if I deserved it all and even worse. I'm absolutely certain that even if she pretended to have changed and be nice on the surface in the very beginning, it wouldn't be long before she goes right back to the same kind of absolutely diabolical, unbelievably narcissistic toxicity behavior and inevitably end up doing even more unapologetic attempts to murder me and all kinds of unhinged criminal things, harming me and others. I've never been trying to enable and or facilitate that at all. And there's absolutely no real evidence otherwise, nor will I ever allow there to be. I will never trust anyone beyond my ability to leave them and cut them out of my life completely, permanently, at any given moment. Ever again. I have to be goddamn practically paranoid now for the rest of my goddamn life that anyone that ever enters my life somehow is operating basically sent to try to falsify evidence for some kind of defamation of me that's being purported by Kimmy, Jamie, their associates, and or my biological relatives and or other subhuman filth from my past like Chloe. Even from that frame, Chloe and all the others from my past are absolutely unconditionally, permanently denied from ever having access to my life and energy at all consensually ever again. Everyone from high school, every biological relative, everyone else at all in closer physical proximity to me. I have absolutely no interest in getting close to any of them, and no amount of homelessness, ostracization, bullying, neglect, or anything else is going to ever randomly change that. If you're not someone of much higher quality with visible public influence and connections that you are unafraid to publicly share to a non-trivial extent, I want absolutely nothing to do with anyone like you who lives so much of their life in the dark, privately trying to scheme or whatever you do that you're most likely inclined to inflict on me like anyone else. The only even remotely adequate reason I can ever see to make exceptions to that at all are attorneys I might hire in pursuit of suing and pressing criminal charges on all those who have wronged me, and especially who continue to wrong me to this day and refuse to take any real and adequate extent of accountability and actually make adequate corrective behavior to remedy the harm they've inflicted on me. Kimmy and Jamie especially are very much extremely seriously going to have to pick a side between me or Chloe Chan Kin and all my biological relatives. They must make a decision and stick with it truly permanently, once and for all. No half-hearted garbage. My cutoff towards all those from my past is not half-hearted at all, and I am completely confident I will only continue to prove that as time passes to anyone that ever seriously questions it in any manner that actually affects my life at all meaningfully. And make no mistake, I haven't forgotten how unbelievably extremely toxic Kimmy and Jamie were to me all this time ever since I met them, especially for this entire overpast year I've been running this podcast. How vicious and relentless they were, with teaming up publicly and privately to extremely aggressively, existentially assault me and effectively conspire and attempt to murder me. How much garbage I had to fight against them, extremely deviously trying to erode at my existence by purporting, both with their own personal politics between each other and their inner circle, and geopolitics at large. I'm entirely uninterested in hearing excuses. Entirely uninterested. I want results. Now. While I've never tried to violate the terms of service of any platform simply for the sake of it, nor for fun, nor as some kind of petty ego battle with anyone, nor out of some kind of obsession with drama, I also still won't be cowering away from asserting my authority and continuing to prove my authenticity to whatever extent I feel necessary through harsher or more questionable rhetoric as I see fit. I'm already treated like a goddamn joke when I really shouldn't be, and trying too hard to seem calm or level-headed when literally anything I say or do is facing attempts to warp it beyond any capability for any actual ultimate benefit to myself is not something I'm willing to tolerate anyone trying to bully, abuse, and coerce me into feeling I need to do because of some rule set that exists as a guideline applicable in most cases and hasn't been designed for extremely exceptional circumstances like those I'm facing. My life remains in ongoing, active, extreme danger, and even if it wasn't,
I remain in extreme deprivation that is inherently life-threatening for multiple reasons that also extend far beyond simply me getting murdered by a hitman one day. My life is extremely harsh, and I face extremely egregiously disproportionately miserable and deprived circumstances compared to the amount of work I put in to have a life where I'm not completely broke, homeless, and literally have to dig through the garbage for food to survive, as I hope every night that I manage to wake up in the morning and don't get stabbed to death or shot in the head in my sleep, or while I'm trying to go to sleep by some hitman sent to murder me to cover up some egregious criminal conspiracy to murder me I've already proven irrefutably exists. There's absolutely zero real evidence to prove I'm doing this podcast for fun, financial gain, out of indebtedness to anyone, or with any ulterior motives. I'm literally spending all day and night fully focused on releasing things on this podcast with the intent of drastically changing my current living conditions and life circumstances as a whole into what I know is much more objectively appropriate for what I actually deserve, because I'm seriously, extremely, deeply unhappy with how they currently are and have been, and I see no even remotely more effective method to even possibly achieve that. Like, I've never been trying to give anyone I mention here clout with my efforts. The reason most of those I'm mentioning most of the time aren't even really well known is because I've seriously never been chasing clout myself here either. Even Chloe's brand is substantially more clouded publicly than anything I have online with her few thousand Instagram followers. But I choose to fight purely on the merit of objective facts supportive of my authority with extremely nuanced and meticulous detail-oriented precision, where I refuse to even risk any kind of codependency on anyone or any kind of behavior that might discredit my position. Because even though it's obviously going to be a lot harder for me like that, it allows me to live with dignity and ensure that any attention I might ever get is actually fully deserved by me and won't ever come at the cost of my long-term happiness or my soul in general to any extent. If I'm going to be attacked so viciously with murderous energy, I'm going to do a full return to sender, and I seriously don't care who that might cause to dislike me to whatever extent. You can question my intent in sending extremely negative energy to anyone ever, sure, but my integrity is the real thing being questioned behind the scenes and then brought into public humiliation I don't deserve objectively, and I will only continue to prove I'm not a fraud at all. I understand it's not very pleasant, in general, to be sending extremely serious, extremely negative energy to others through content creation, but I'll reiterate that I was never trying to end up doing that, and it's neither fun nor financially beneficial at all for me to have to do. I started this podcast literally as a matter of life or death survival, because I realized I've seriously been getting so extremely egregiously defamed, disrespected, and neglected by literally everyone I ever at all considered myself close to, with absolutely no exceptions, with such unapologetic and exclusively malicious intent towards me that I was literally going to end up rapidly downward spiraling in life and get murdered, become suicidal, actually start committing crimes that could never be seen as dignified with any explanation, and generally become increasingly pathetic and hopeless in life and pretty much certainly face a very early demise otherwise. All because literally everyone I ever knew betrayed me like subhuman filth when I never would have done anything like that to any of them, and they really should have seen and known that rather clearly with how I'd treated all of them. That includes everyone online and offline, for the record. If you can see me saying harsh things to those I keep proving fully deserve it, and who seem to want to avoid ever facing it no matter what, and you hate me for that, then you were going to hate me anyways for who they were trying to have me murdered by framing me as always having been anyways. So it's both stupid and detrimental to me for me to care at all. Because I'm not a fraud, I refuse to cower in fear of others' judgment for any reason, most certainly including but not limited to simply because my opinion of several highly influential figures is unpopular and likely to bring me hate from their audiences. There are multiple prominent influencers I also don't have any particular issue with, even if I still see them as pretty scummy for seemingly not really caring at all about what's been happening to me. I can already see how it's going to end up happening between me and them. They're eventually going to want to be my friend if they don't already, and it's going to end up showing more and more until eventually something's going to happen in public, and Kimmy and Jamie are going to end up with their careers and lives in shambles if they don't sober up and start behaving actually decently towards me before it's really too late. I've already recently seen Nuxanor start saying subhuman filth, which I'm pretty sure isn't a term he'd used before. Tectone is going to increasingly realize that if he has any real integrity and dignity, defending and befriending someone who's had potentially life-ending accusations made against them like he has is only really going to help him both on a personal and professional level, even if he questions my political standing because I identify as a lesbian trans woman. And I don't know much about Asmongold, but I'm going to assume that if he's friendly with Tectone and Nuxanor, I imagine he's not exactly thrilled that Twitch is actually platforming psychopaths like Kimmy and Jamie to literally conspire to murder powerful individuals like me, and effectively supporting terrorism in a much more devious manner than it's effectively doing by platforming Hassan on top of already platforming Hassan. At this point, it feels like I'm building up a case to file a lawsuit on the entire corporation of Twitch Interactive Inc. as a whole for how egregiously their entire management and moderation team is blatantly criminally negligent in managing the activity going on in their platform. I imagine it's rather obvious to them that merely allowing me to have an account on their platform isn't some kind of signal of acceptance of me, when obviously giving me the opportunity to chat in Kimmy, Jamie, and or anyone else's chat is basically just a trap to validate all the criminal and generally immoral things they've inflicted on me all these years. I don't believe in the whole thing of if someone hurts you, just ignore them and try to live your best life no matter what they did. I don't consider my best revenge against anyone who's wronged me to simply be to ignore them and live some super spontaneous supposed best life without them. To even suggest that to me in the kind of circumstances I'm in is beyond naive and stupid. I'd argue it's intentionally malicious and intended to inflict emotional distress on me. That doesn't mean I'd try to force them all to have to be in my life either, and I, in fact, most certainly am and only will continue to force most of them to stay out of it to the fullest extent I can. It's really insane to me, and not in any kind of good way, in case that wasn't already clear enough, the lengths some will go to try to discredit me and make me seem like a generally mean-spirited person, basically simply because I'm not willing to pretend to be on much better terms than I really am with certain scumbags. Basically because I'm unwilling to have been hurt extremely badly by them, and then let them dictate to me how I should handle it in a manner most favorable to what they all wanted at my expense against my consent. But when I'm dealing with prominent public figures that have also extremely deviously and meticulously attempted to position themselves so it's basically as difficult as possible for me to navigate dealing with them in any manner where they aren't perpetually siphoning my energy and forcing me to tolerate some garbage frenemy dynamic, you damn well best believe I won't let them force that dynamic onto me either. I've never been trying to present myself at all as some kind of somehow masochistic, overly self-sacrificing saint or something like that. I don't owe anyone, nor any corporation, any of my time, energy, forgiveness, mercy, validation, cooperation, consent, love, respect, trust, nor anything else that isn't truly being visibly, publicly, adequately reciprocated. I'm yet to be presented with any even remotely adequate evidence otherwise, yet continue to face a reality subjected to being terrorized by many as if that assertion basically couldn't be more false somehow. Not only is literally anything and everything I do weaponized against me and constantly interpreted by many in the most bad faith manner, but I'm facing a situation of constantly being compelled to have to even explain and defend myself extensively on things I never should have had to. Every day this continues, it just makes it worse and worse for anyone and everyone involved in continuing to neglect me despite everything. Perhaps most content creators of just about any size face such things to some extent, but I'm absolutely convinced there's not even one out there in the entire world who's being forced to endure it to the kind of extent I have been, and yet seeing results not even remotely proportionately appropriate in any kind of positive manner where anyone has any even remotely objectively adequate evidence to have any reasonable grounds to assert how I'm being treated is even remotely humane. And even more damningly, it doesn't seem anyone among all those clearly paying attention are even really attempting to assert it is humane. Just watching and laughing like the raw reality of my life is some kind of goddamn entertainment. Hitmen regularly coming after me for being a genuinely good person, egregiously betrayed and wronged by literally everyone I was ever close to, is like a goddamn reality TV show to them all. I feel there isn't even any slur out there that can even come close to adequately expressing the kind and amount of contempt I honestly believe you deserve to be seen with by me if you seriously support the world operating how it does that would ever leave anyone in the kind of circumstances I've been left in. And I honestly don't care whether or not you believe in God or some kind of higher power or not. But my very existence itself objectively substantiates my position far beyond the merit of any individual and or organization's approval of me ever could. Even billionaires can't do what I do, and I'm absolutely certain they're all well aware, at least certainly those that know of me, that it's no small feat. It doesn't take being a billionaire to recognize that either. Just not being an extremely brain-dead coward loser. Seeing myself as a god doesn't mean I don't believe myself worthy of humane treatment, nor that I should be free to do absolutely anything I want at all times with zero real regard for consequences to myself and or others. It really just means that I seem to be a lot more painfully aware of just how egotistical most people are and how viciously they will go to unbelievable lengths to deny it to the day they die, yet I don't let that corrupt my soul into somehow becoming perverted to enjoy some kind of self-destruction.